Hey, I'm Cyclone, and I hope you enjoyed that, I guess, fairly long bossing compilation at the beginning of this video. I don't know how much you watched, how much you skipped, but I would do appreciate if you can give me feedback of this, if you enjoyed that part, or if you would have wanted it to be shorter, less, or just specific things, or what else you would have liked to see there. Would be really appreciated again. But anyway, I need to state something. This build is not per se cheap. It utilizes a Mageblood and it utilizes a very low effective hit pool, or well, overall hit pool, to get a lot of damage. It is meant for two things. Sanctum rushing, no hit specifically. It can do no hit, it can do few hits. It has a lot of damage, it has a lot of pre-firing, it is really good for Sanctum, even though I haven't showed it here. I have a separate video that shows me making a no-hit run and only getting hit on the final boss from the dot ground because I positioned myself a tiny bit too much to the left. So it is more than capable of for Sanctum and has a very fun time in Sanctum. I enjoyed this. I specifically made it for Sanctum and compared to other Sanctum runner like Tornado Shot and what's the name? Spark variants, be it Aura, Cold Conversion, Poison. It is comparable cheap to those, assuming everybody uses the Mageblood. So that just stated. Please keep that in mind when evaluating this video. It is meant for Sanctum and it's obviously made for bossing. It is not made for surviving, it's not made for mapping. Alright. Now let's take a look at this build. Very quickly, the configuration. Please, not convince. What is the word for this? Make sure yourself that you're happy with this setup for the configuration, and if you're not, there's going to be a POB in the description. You can take a look at yourself, you can adjust the configuration to the point where you think this is going to be the actual, reflecting the actual stats of the build. So very quickly, we are going to utilize the Inquisitor Ascendency, so we always consume to be stationary, or well, actually what we're getting from stationary is the effective of Consecrated Ground, which we are going to always be under. We are going to be always under low life, except for 1 second after using a life flask. We are going to be always on Consecrated Ground. We are, just with the damage we have always chilled, ignited, shocked. We almost always have maximum effectiveness of chill, shock, and have an ignite on the enemy, even though the ignite doesn't do damage, we just have it there. We are unnerving enemies, we are leeching, we are considering the enemy on Consecrated Ground because of using Zero Tree, we are consuming always 2 burns on the enemy, and we are assuming that half of, well, the last bit of the duration has happened. We have 3-second duration in our brands, so in the last bit of duration we have about another 10 million, or well, 5 to 10 million damage. Just keep that in mind. This is the thing that you could arguably disable, and it would significantly change the state, because if the bosses don't die instantly to 45 million damage, they're uber bosses, they survive a bit longer, and then they get to the last second where we get the full damage out of this. This is my reasoning for having it enabled. As for the enemy stats, we are assuming a Guardian or Pinnacle boss, but however, I've shown uber bosses, so for uber bosses we are looking at 60.5 million damage. Which for an uber boss is nothing to scoff at, that's definitely pretty good. And again, other stats aren't that good. We are getting our stat requirements so that they're fitting. We get a bit of life so that we don't die to any hit, so that we can at least survive something like a normal auto attack, or a very quick dot, or just a trap damage, or an auto attack of an enemy. But we can't survive big hits. It is not made for that, again, just to let that out. But anyway, let's take a look at the tree. Our Ascendency choices are basically the go-to Inquisitor at this point. We're using Sanctuary and Pierce Path to have always consecrated effect on us, and also have a bit of energy regeneration based on our Consecrated Ground regeneration, giving our life regen. And then we also have, because of Zero Tree, applying Consecrated Ground under our enemies and giving them 50% increased damage taken. Then we have Righteous Providence to give us a lot of crit chance, as well as stats needed to use our determination for the tiny bit of survivability, and the Intelligence for the damage scaling we get from that. And then we have Inevitable Judgment. We are guaranteed to crit when we set it up, and that means we ignore elemental resistances, so we don't need something like elemental weakness, conductivity, or something. We can just always crit, ignore resistances, so we can use a mark. The rest of the tree, we're using the following. We're using 2 large clusters with the node Zadist on each, and then once Overshock and once Thunderstruck. To get those 2 nodes in the front, we want Doyani's Lesson or Widespread Destruction in the back. I think it works with any third notable, but I cannot guarantee it on the third one. I haven't tested it. I just think it is, but Widespread and Doyani, as you can see here, it works. You can take any of these 2 combinations to get Thunderstruck and Overshock in the front. For medium clusters, we want to have Grand Design Remarkable 3 times. Remarkable with 3 of them gives us a lot of cast speed, so that cast speed is, as far as I know, also giving it a better hit rate. And then we have the chance to upgrade additional brand. This allows us to always summon 2 brands, which means that we are using the Rune Binder. I don't have it selected, but that is because we're getting it from our body armor, Skin of the Lords. Oh, actually it's... Nope. Did a mistake there. Sorry. The Skin of the Lord is with Painted Human. We're using Rune Binder, not Painted Human. We have both. One of them on the Skin of the Lords, one on the tree. Sorry for that mess up. So we have Rune Binder with Remarkable. We are always summoning 2 brands, so there will always be 2 brands on the bosses. And then we use Grand Design to have more brand attachment range and increased damage. The range means we have an easier time in Sanctum, we have an easier time for bosses, we can be further away, which means we die less. For our last cluster, we want Cold Conduction and Storm Rider. It gives us increased effect of our cold and lightning elements, making it easier to cap them out, and also having a more guaranteed freezes. With our damage is almost guaranteed, but better be safe than sorry, because freezing means even more damage. We get to that in a bit. And then we have Storm Rider to get increased cold and increased lightning damage, as we are always shocking and chilling. And the chance to get power charges is whatever, because we are going to use Grand Spectrum. And this is the second expansive piece. We have the Mageblood, and we have this Grand Spectrum in particular. The minimum frenzy charge Grand Spectrum is expansive. The power charge one, as far as I've looked, is not expansive. And neither is the elemental damage one. You could potentially get the endurance charge one instead of the elemental damage one. However, the endurance charge is expansive again. So if you want to stay cheap, don't get that. You can, instead of gating the frenzy charge and the power charge Grand Spectrum, potentially get yourself, Harmony of Purpose, to get 20% chance to get a power frenzy or endurance charge on hit, to have charge generation on the build. However, this would mean that you are spending about the same as a frenzy charge, but you aren't guaranteed to have the charges. So when you're just walking, for example in Sanctum, you're going to be a bit slower because you don't have frenzy charges. Also, you're going to be a bit less damage because the damage has first ramped up. You first have to hit your 3 times the frenzy, the power one, so you get your free power charges. This is just not recommended. This is going to be more stable, even if it's a bit more expensive. As for our other jewel socket, we want a Watcher's Eye with cast speed while affected by Zeal Tree. And then, optionally, we also want crit chance by Wrath. This will guarantee basically our crit chance to be always 100. It's going to be the last piece missing for the crit chance. Everything else we have on the gems and on the tree already. Because we are also going to use high voltage, as we are pretty much instantly shocking the enemies. We get increased crit chance from here as well. This is also giving us a ton of crit chance, and it allows us to get the mastery for non-projectile chaining lightning skills chain 1 time, or 1 additional time. Brand just chain, so this helps us not only with having a bit more clear, smoothing it out a bit, but it also helps us with our target, or well, with our damage and invitations, and in the sanctuary, when we get something like a lot of guards spawning in the arenas, or they spawn next to each other, or you have the affliction with every guard is guarded by a gargoyle or a company. So this is definitely also a good node to a good mastery to have. The rest of the tree, we have crit, more crit, even more crit. Oh yeah, and I forgot we have some more crit. Oh wait, more crit, we have brand crit, and also the node that makes the brand reattach, so this helps with a bit more clear. And then we have more brands, and oh yeah, more brand damage. And then fixing the rest of our tree with a bit of life. A tiny bit more life here, here, and here. This life is meant so that we are able to tank those tiny hits, so that we aren't instantly dying just by being breast at. We want a bit of health. We don't want to go full on the HP. It's not needed for Sanctum as far as I've tested, and for bossing it definitely helps to have a bit of health. You survive an initial hit, you survive tiny hits, and then you can still dodge and reposition yourself. And then we need a bit of reservation efficiency. We need influence, sovereignty, and an anointed charisma. And then we can use the masteries, increased effective hours on us. We are using quite a few. And the life reservation. We want our life reservation, as seen here, if I don't use it, it's at 49. We want the reservation to be at 51 to 60. The lower to 50 the better, but we want it to be above 50 because we want that one tiny bit left that cannot be regenerated by anything but flask. So our regeneration and our leech allows us to basically have overleech. So when we have damage taken from the petrified blood, it's a temporary damage that is going to get away, but we can counter leech it already with our leech and our leech and regeneration. We can counteract against it, and that gives us the survivability that is kind of hard to display here, and that makes it tanky enough for bossing and Sanctum. But yeah, that is basically the tree, which leaves us with skills and items. Now the items are not that spectacular, so we're going to go over skills. The main difference between our bossing and Sanctum setup is that we are using an Searing Bond Totem for Sanctum. It is by this point a known strategy to utilize it. And for bossing, we just use a portal gem so that when we are mapping, we are not consuming portal scrolls, as we are going to be quite quick in our maps. And for the Sanctum, the way the Searing Bond Totem works, I'm just going to grab that ahead and then get over with the rest of the setting. The Searing Bond helps us with meteors. Whenever there's a meteor, they have a spawning point. So you can place it either on the spawning point, a bit before the spawning point, or between you and the spawning point, depending on the meteor labyrinth you're running. If it's where they come from both sides, you can place one totem here, walk here, place one totem here, walk here, place a totem here, walk here, and you're through. Just repeat it. If it's a one where it's like just a wave of meteors coming at you, you place one, walk a bit behind it. Place the next one, walk a bit. And you're always just going to place one, and even if a meteor is like going here, it's still between one of these totems, so it's going to get blocked by the totem and you can continue. This is going to help massively with getting a no-hit run-in, or getting the run-in for invocations where you can't have inspiration and can't recover your resolve. Either of those, it's definitely going to help you a lot. But yeah, let's take a look at the rest of the skill set. We are going to use a Storm brand, connected with a Divergent Swift brand. The Swift brand is the Divergent, it's that what gets us the more damage in the last moment of our brands. We have about 3 seconds again, so in the last second of our brands, we basically get 20% more damage, which is nothing to scoff at, it's a more multiplier. We then use Concentrated Effect because we don't really need the AoE. We get the AoE from the reattaching and the chaining. It is enough to clear packs, but it's not going to be enough to clear something like a Legion or a Breach. We're going to use a Awakened added lightning damage for the additional level and the flat lightning. Then we want an Empower, preferable level 4, but a level 3 is going to be only 5 million damage. And then we're going to use Inspiration, and either one is fine. If you're on the non-Mageblood version, you want to have a Divergent one, as you're not going to have the mana cost in the other cases. But if you are running the Mageblood, you're not going to want a Divergent one. Then we're going to have a 5 link of auras. Enlightened level 3 is going to be enough. We want that link to a level 21 Zeal tree, level 21 Determination to again have that enough survivability in the maps. Level 20 Petrified Blood and preferable 2120 Herald of Ice. However, a 20 is enough. It gives us like 100k damage, which is nice to have, but it's definitely not needed. Then we have another set of auras which we reserve on our life with a 2020 Arrogance, a 21 0 Vitality, a 21 20 0 Precision, and a 2020 Defiance banner to get again the tiny bit of extra survivability. And lastly, to finish up our auras, we are going to use a Divine Wrath. Now, this is set up by using Wrath, Divine Blessing, Inspiration, and Arcane Surge. Arcane Surge wants to be divergent, so we have it lasting for 6 seconds. Our Wrath lasts for 11 seconds. The Blessing and the Inspiration also be divergent. In this setup, we now have a 34 cast with a 67 regeneration, so basically 3, for getting the additional aura and getting the effect on the aura, making this very powerful for us. Now again, in the non-Mageblood version, for this, it's going to cost you a bit more. Or well, if you don't have this flask active, which we get to later. So we need this for later, but it can work the same. But if you don't have enough regeneration in a lower budget version, you can remove Arcane Surge from here and add the Arcane Surge instead of an enhance to Assassin's Mark. Which brings us to Assassin's Mark and Righteous Fire in our buffs and debuffs section. We're going to want to use a Righteous Fire that is divergent for getting additional spell damage, an Assassin's Mark, which is anomalous to make the boss take increased damage, and then an Enhance, giving us quite a bit of damage. If we take a look at the damage we're losing from Enhance, it's actually a few millions. So this is definitely something where a level 4 isn't necessarily needed, but having a level 3 Enhance on this is definitely good. And that ends us with the portal, which we use for bossing, and then a flame dash, which we use for mobility. As for our items, we are using the interaction between Annihilating Light and Heat Shiver. Heat Shiver is giving us a ton of elemental damage, basically 3 times our elemental damage. So if it's a high value crit, because lightning goes with this range, that high lightning crit gets converted to cold. And then we have Heat Shiver, because we have that high damage, it freezes the boss. So if the boss is freezed, he now takes all that cold damage as additional fire damage. And also, he takes cold damage as additional fire damage if he's chilled. We have about 30% chill on the bosses. So we are chilling the boss. We are freezing the boss. That's 100% 30 of our cold as fire damage. And our cold is 96% of our lightning damage. This is just massive. We have Shock, Freeze, Ignite on the boss, all the damage on the boss. This basically one-shots everything that isn't Uber, and Uber dies very quickly. I guess it doesn't one-shot rocks, it's not enough for that. However, it is fairly quick on a Chimera instead. Then, body armor already mentioned. We want a Skin of the Lords. We want the +2 to socket gems to get the Empower better, to get our main skill better, to get our supports better. And then we want to have either Pain Attunement or Runebinder on it, so that we save a passive point on our tree. Of course, if you have an invocation for either one of those and a good relic, you can use that too. My relic had additional cold damage to spell, so nothing really important. Now we get to a few rares. We want 3 45 to 48 resistance rolls. 2 of them on our gloves. The gloves has the following mod though. It has a temple mod that has cold resistance and more increased damage against chilled enemies. This is the preferred mod we want, and we want it combined with lightning or fire resistance, and then preferably also a high life roll. Also, on top of all that, we can craft a prefix, increased damage during any flask effect, which gives us again a bit more damage, overall making this gloves very powerful for us. On the implicits, we want the following 2, specifically these 2. We want cold damage leech this life, because most of our damage is guaranteed cold. Having that cold damage leech this life is giving us the overleech part with the combination of petrified blood and having 51 to 58 life unreserved, life unreserved. And then we want the unnerved to have another 10% increased damage on the enemies. We are hitting so many times, 10 hits, that 50% chance basically could be a 100. And again, keep in mind we are placing 2 burns on the enemy. And that leaves us with the boots. The boots can be basically just movement speed boots, movement speed. We want to use Unveil to have the movement speed and then have either the Transport Onslaught if you're not using a Mageblood, have the additional movement speed if you haven't been hit recently, or the cannot be chilled part. Either of those unveils is fine. Craft life on it, and as for the suffixes, we want preferable life regeneration rate to make our vitality a bit stronger. And then the missing resistance we didn't got on the gloves, and then a chaos resistance wall to get our survivability again a tiny bit higher. And as for the implicits, we can get more life regeneration and action speed. And that leaves us with amulet, rings, and belt. I mean, belt is already in this state pretty obvious, but anyway. We want a +1 amulet. This is actually pretty easy to craft. It's not cheap, but easy. If you get a fractured +1 lightning or +1 all spells, you can then use an essence of, I think it's Zeal for crit multi, and use it until you get cast speed. Then do a multimod. Suffix can be changed if you have an open suffix. If you don't, just do suffix can be changed. And use a Veiled Chaos, craft mana, and you're basically guaranteed, I think it's a 2% chance to miss, to get a life unveil. Then you have life with mana regen, which is nice to have. Craft the missing resistance if you have a suffix open, or any prefix, be it energy shield or whatever you want, if you have a prefix open, and that is done too. And then we have 2 Call of the Brotherhoods. We want them with the Elemental Catalyst to get us most lightning converted cold. Then you can prefer a high lightning wall to get a bit more base damage on it. And then the Mageblood. Now, of course, I mentioned there is a non-Mageblood version. So for the non-Mageblood version, we need to use a belt with dexterity and strength implicit because it's a heavy belt, and then get there some resistances, because if we aren't using a Mageblood, we can't use a Bitmood Blast to get all our resistances. So we will need some on the belt, and we will need Purity of Elements to get our resistances as high as possible. If we are using that combination, we can get the basically almost all capped except lightning rest by a bit. But again, this is for bossing and sanctum running, so it should be fine enough. But there is a very big but in this. If you're not using a Mageblood, you need this Diamond Flask. I'm going to want a Diamond Flask with increased effectiveness to get your crit almost capped. And you want the craft reduced mana cost of skills. If you're using a Mageblood, you have that mana cost at all times, and it also, we want that because of the increased effect on this specific thing. We need it, we activate it, we activate our Divine Wrath, then we activate our brands. If the brands cost 0 because you also used a Divine Inspiration on them, you can first spam brands, then use it, then use your Wrath, then spam more brands because we want new brands on the boss and we are still having the inspiration charges, then one-shot the boss and we are good to go. The other flasks are basically flask charge on crit, and then the cast speed, elemental resistances, and crit chance. And in the Mageblood variant, we're using the same. We have crit chance, we have cast speed, we have elemental resistances, and we have mana cost. We just change the implicit to be used from full life to increased effectiveness, and the prefix to be, instead of getting charges on a crit, to have increased effect. And that's a flask, and that's basically everything. Only things that are missing are 2 more. We want a careful divine life flask. The prefix more recovery is used by low life is basically for us a free double effectiveness of the life flask. We have about 1.5k health unreserved. And if our flask is recovering, let's say 6, I'm just rounding for the sake of simplicity, 6k health over 4 seconds, that is almost our full life. I think it's 1.6, 1.7k life per second regenerated. That is pretty good. Because this means that activating the flask is basically instant full life for us. And then we have also immunity blood and corrupted blood, so we don't need that on a jewel. And that leaves us with the last thing. We want 2 rare jewels, which I haven't mentioned earlier, that have max life, cast speed, and then crit multi that works for us, be it lightning skills preferred, elemental skills, or just global crit multi. And that basically is setting us up good to go with this build for bossing. Hopefully this was informative, And if you are ending up with this build, tell me your results, tell me how it felt, and if I can improve anything on this video or on the build, well, on the build POB, please share that as well. All that being said, have a wonderful day and hopefully a good rest of the league.